very much, Stovall, a very distinguished civil servant, police officer, one of the only director of IB with a Shaurya Chakra. My very dear friend, Ambassador of Ethiopia and Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia, and members of this audience. And particularly delighted because I realized today there was such a scare that both grids have failed, northern grid, eastern grid, and that the road may be completely chaotic, and people are advised not to sort of get on the road if they could help it. And in spite of that, all of you have come. It's indeed very, very kind. My interest in this subject, I would say this because of, before I come to the subject, two incidents. First was, my first posting was in Tokyo, and I was visiting one day our science attaché, Professor Ashok Che, who lived in a suburb. And it was not easy to find way in Tokyo, and I lost my way, but generally in that area. And I was standing at this square, and in the corner I see a statue, which looked very much like the statue of a Hindu goddess of Saraswati. And I said, here is a case. Some people came so many centuries ago, very small number. What impact they have left in a country as far and generally a closed society. And then followed Indonesia, which is huge influence, and Cambodia with Angkor Wat. So that was, but still more of a passing cultural interest. On 6th June 1984, the day of the Operation Blue Star, when the Indian Army unfortunately had to go into the Golden Triangle, I reached to take over my new post as Consul General of India in Bangkok. That time, my son was going to join class 4 and my daughter was going to begin class 1. We already were informed on our way when we were in Ottawa for briefings for 3 days that situation was very tense. On 4th, 3rd, the Indian Army had started surrounding the Gurdwaras, and 4th, when I called up the consulate, and the acting consul general told me that he was away for a lunch, but when he returned, he found that the consulate had been taken over by 2 armed Sikhs who had taken out their swords, and the staff was hosted for 20 minutes. 6th June morning we reached there. We step out of the aircraft and we are met by 2 tall Royal Canadian Mounted Police officers. And along with the acting consul general, they introduced themselves and they asked for our documents. We handed over our passports and they said, don't worry about the rest of the formalities. And there is always a side stair where you go down from where from where the staff can come in. And the 2 cars were waiting at the tarmac. And we were driven to our home in those 2 waiting cars, in the police cars. Now this was probably the most extraordinary experience. I doubt any other Indian diplomat has had that experience, that on his first arrival, he steps out of aircraft, he is met by 2 policemen who take him to his new home in the security vehicle. And throughout that drive, I kept thinking that this is really a very interesting situation. Vancouver is one of the farthest coasts of India, almost 20 hours of flight. You have Canada is known to be an extremely peaceful country. We had very good relations, except that they were irritated with us on our nuclear test of 1974. And we have no reason. I don't know anybody in this country. Nobody knows anyone. Nobody knows me. And why on my first arrival I have to be taken in this manner under police escort? And for rest of my 4.5 years long posting, the longest posting of my foreign service career, and also I dare say the most difficult, most challenging posting of my entire foreign service career, more challenging than even the 71 war. I kept delving into this issue every day. And the answer was simple, that because there were at that time about 400,000 to 450,000 people of Indian origin living in Canada, and particularly Vancouver had a population of nearly 90,000 people of Indian origin, and many of whom had migrated 3 generations ago. So it is because of presence of these Indians that this issue, this development which has taken place so far off in India, its implications, its reverberations are felt as far as in Canada. And I understood that wherever there are people of Indian origin, important Indian political developments would have an impact in those countries, and it is eventually going to hugely impact our relations with that country. India's relations with Canada were strained for over a decade because of this issue of the separatist movement of Khalistani. The second event that took place, incident that took place when I was posted there, in 1987, a coup took place in Fiji. Colonel Rambuka ousted the government led by Timochi Bawandra, a native Fijian, but whose support base and who was supported by a party which was substantially of people of Indian origin, including Mahendra Chaudhary was finance minister in that government, who later became the prime minister of Fiji. And this gentleman, because they felt now the natives had lost power, so he organized this coup. And next day, about 10, 12 people of the Fijian community, and there was a large Indo-Fijian community, about 40,000 people. Indo-Fijians means people of Indian origin who had migrated from Fiji to Canada. Their delegation came to see me at my house and asked me, what is Government of India going to do about this coup? And here again, I asked myself a question. Now here are these people whose great-grandparents left India. They came from Fiji to this place. They even have left Fiji. Now the coup has taken place in Fiji, a country of 1 million people. And their expectation till today is that what would India do in this case? Now, any number of coups had taken place in Thailand, which is right next door to India. And it has had nobody asked us what are these expected to do, or nobody in India was particularly bothered about the coup in Thailand. But here, governments supported by people of Indian origin had been ousted. So the people who had left 100 years ago, their great-grandchildren have come to ask the India's Consul General, what would India do about it? And I said, here is a country, 1 million people, we have no strategic interest in that part of the world. They don't produce any commodity like oil or uranium or something which would make us interested. The only connection is that it had, at that time, 500,000 people. 51% of the population to be precise that time, was people of Indian origin. And not only did it impact our relations with Fiji, some of you would recall, we had to close down our mission in Fiji. And my colleague T.P. Srinivasan had to leave the place. And eventually, when there was a difference of opinion in the approach to Langoka government and what followed afterwards, that it became even an irritant in our relationship for some time. One of the irritants in our relationship with the neighboring Australia, which had a different point of view of the government, which was the result of the coup. So I said, here, look at the impact again. A coup in Fiji has impact on us, and not only on us, it impacts our relations with Australia because there are people of Indian origin there. And their demand was that the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting is going to take place in Vancouver, and this should become a major agenda of the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. And then we organized ourselves, we lobbied very hard, hundreds of letters were drafted, sent on behalf of these people, and eventually Commonwealth expelled Fiji because of hectic lobbying that was organized in many capitals of the world. So these two events drove home a point to me, that impact of a domestic development on our external relations in countries as far as Canada and other places, and similarly impact of a development abroad with which otherwise we would have no problem, but because of the presence of people of Indian origin. And so now the word diaspora is very frequently used. I would run through the history part, otherwise we will run short of time. It's a Greek word basically meaning dispersal from a common source. First time it was used for the Jewish people who had to, under duress, leave the Holy Land. The Indian diaspora or overseas Indian communities or Pravasi Bharatiyas, they also have left India in three phases. Phase one, I talked about the Southeast Asia, Central Asia, the people who went, but they are so completely part of local and the number was so small that they are no longer diaspora. But the powerful impact they have left, that the imprint of India is there, of our civilization and culture, on every aspect of life in Southeast Asia. And so what even a small number of articulate people with knowledge power, how they can influence, that's the best example. Today we have next phase is, we have about 25 million people, probably a million or two less than this, but the government keeps saying 25 million, so I've accepted their figures. And they are basically three categories. Non-resident Indians are the people who still hold the citizenship of India and are living in a foreign country. The PIOs, or the person of Indian origin, are those who have become citizens of a foreign country, but they are of Indian origin. And stateless person of Indian origin are those who have no documents to prove that they are Indians, and they have neither that country's document nor this country's citizenship document. And largest number today, as Ambassador Bhatia, my colleague, is here, is in Myanmar. Fortunately, the number is gradually going down, but Sri Lanka and Myanmar have accounted for most of this category. I would not go into details of the migration, but phase two is when the indentured labor system started. It's basically labor migration when the plantation, these three major colonial powers abolished slavery: Britain in 1834, France in 1846, and Holland in 1873. And the plantation economies became absolutely unviable, and they had to find a substitute for slave labor, so they brought the indentured labor from India. People particularly from those areas who were familiar with sugarcane cultivation, so you had people from Bihar, eastern UP, central UP, and in south from Tamil Nadu and small parts of Andhra and Kerala, and started with Mauritius in 1834, Caribbean 1838 onwards, South Africa, and then you have ending with Fiji, the last of the indentured labor. Then you have followed by the plantation workers in Myanmar, Malaysia, and Sri Lanka. Under a different system, in the sense they didn't have an indenture contract, but they were pretty much the working class, working agriculture workers. And these people were naturally, to service them, were followed by a trading class, a professional class, and Mahatma Gandhi was one such professional who migrated from India, and they were called the free passage people. In the sense they bought their own passage, they had no restrictions, they could come back any time. Not only the British, the French took the Indians to Guadeloupe, Martinique, La Reunion Island, in Indian Ocean, and the Portuguese took them to Mozambique and Angola. And a very touching, and with this we will then jump to our main topic of today, a very touching sort of Pravasi Ghat has been built in Mauritius, and where they have a statue of a first indentured labor, a lady and a man, and this couplet, this poem by a Mauritian poet, Ashutosh Vishwamitra Ganga, who's written this, and I found it so touching that I included it in the high-level committee's report. And this just sums up the kind of contribution that the Indians have made to the development of the countries where they have settled. And I must say, and it will be a good project to take, that unfortunately the contribution of Indians to the development of the countries where they have settled, no good quality document has yet been prepared in respect of a single country. At the most, a monograph kind of a thing is there, but nothing more than that. And I think we owe it to them that we should commission historians and other sociologists and economists, a team to make the contribution of Indians to the society. And then the next wave are these people who have gone post-independence to mostly what I would say professional class, educated migrants to North America, to West Europe. West Europe had huge shortage after Second World War. And places like Australia, New Zealand, of course, Australia and both US and Canada had small numbers before independence, and the famous Komagata Maru incident which took place in 1913 or 1914. But these professionals who were highly educated or who acquired even further higher education, their achievements have become very well known, and it is migration of these kind of people from developing countries which led to the coinage of this term, brain drain. And the last segment of diaspora are about 5 million people in the Gulf countries, which started after the oil boom of 1973. And entire infrastructure substantially has been built by the South Asians, Indian, Pakistanis, Sri Lankans, and Bangladeshis, but largest number of Indians. Now, to give you an idea of the spread of the Indian diaspora, we and the Chinese are the most diverse diaspora with presence in every continent. We have 11 countries where there are more than 500,000 PIOs, 23 countries with 100,000 PIOs, and about 50 countries with 10,000 or more people. Now, I would skip the sort of pre-independence thing and all, otherwise we will run out of time. But in nutshell, only 2 sentences is that the government, the colonial government, primarily looked after the interests of the colonial power. And when there was keen interest taken by the Congress Party and Indian public opinion was aroused against the indenture, the Congress Party took up this issue in every AICC session and then made representations to the government and even sent people to these colonies where there was Indian indentured labor to study their situation. And the government, as a result, was forced to take some minimum measures. They formed a committee. In 1837, then they came up with this first Indian Immigration Act and put down and stipulated conditions that must be fulfilled for indenture, etc. But they remain more of a window dressing. But they had to manage the political opinion in India. And many very eminent Indians were sent to these by the Congress Party to study the position. And Mahatma Gandhi himself sent C.F. Andrews to Fiji and Australia, Manilal Doctor to Mauritius, and others, Congress leaders. I would skip Shastri's Sri Lanka back, because again the issue that how Indo-Sri Lankan relations have been affected by this Tamil plantation workers there, and then the Idi Amin's famous suppression of the Asian communities, as he called it. Now, what basically till then the government of India's policy, when we do is for Nehru's policy pre-independence was, he has made as late as 1946 a speech where he has said that India will take care of its people after we are independent and strong. Post-independence, his policy is best summed up in reply to a parliament question by Seth Govindas, where he said, our interest in people overseas, by Indians, is primarily cultural and civilizational. We do not interfere in the political matters. So this was a sea change. There the interests of diaspora had to be the precedence had to be given to the larger foreign policy objectives of the non-alignment, anti-colonialism, fight against apartheid, and with some justification. Now, what are the strengths of the diaspora? Rising prosperity, particularly the diaspora in the developed world, world-class business and technical skills, willing to collaborate with India, and huge network value. I would straight away first come, because that's our main topic today, the impact of, I've already referred to the 2 incidents which give you an impact of the domestic development and what happened. Now, today world's sole superpower, United States of America. How does it impact our relations with US? The Indian community, after it acquired confidence that it can interact on equal terms with the mainstream, once they had arrived, they had made money, they had acquired qualification, a position in the society, then they started getting themselves politically organized and taking up causes of India. And no doubt, I must mention a word here, that real political engagement of India started with the emergency. The government of India's engagement in the active engagement with the diaspora, particularly in US. When emergency was declared in 1975, both the Congress Party tried to mobilize to have support for the emergency, and then Bharatiya Janasangh mobilized the communities abroad to oppose the emergency and the measures that were taken, and many of the leaders opposed to emergency had taken refuge in particularly in the United States of America. So the Indian missions had to actively engage with the people of the Indian community. And then you have once the community started getting organized, it would take up causes to India, important to India. So you have Burton Amendment, the famous congressman who used to move a cut motion on India's aid, and it became a litmus test of what kind of support we enjoyed. He was a strong supporter of Pakistan, and the Indian community would lobby very hard, was mobilized by our mission, then started mobilizing them to defeat the Burton Amendment year after year. Other major contribution that we formed India Caucus on the Capitol Hill, and it is the largest caucus of US congressmen and senators. On the Capitol Hill, there is no caucus with larger membership than that. And it again, the embassy very successfully worked with the community, that they worked with their local congressmen and eventually with senators. So you have caucus in both houses now, and it takes up issues of importance to India, and people like Solars earlier, who's no more, and then Akabir, many of these people became strong supporters of India because of the pressure and lobbying of the Indian community. During the Kargil conflict, Indian community was a great asset. I was consul general in Chicago those days, and any senator, and more than Kargil even, in the wake of our nuclear tests. When sanctions were imposed, we became virtually persona non grata. The US was very angry for first few months, and people would not even meet easily. And we would then pick up the phone, ask the most influential member of the community in that particular congressman's district, and then he would fix the appointment in no time. So much so I remember that a small place called Kalamazoo, it's 110 kilometers from Chicago, and the congressman from there, Fred Upton, who's still today in contact and a good friend now, and he was one of the very vocal persons in the House on this. And I found out that his cardiologist was an Indian one, Dr. Krishna Jain, and I said, what is this? You can't even influence your patient. So Krishna Jain said, no problem, you come, I will organize your lunch with him. So I went and had lunch with Fred Upton, and then Fred Upton said, all right, I will do one thing. We will jointly address a town hall meeting. Now this was something most extraordinary, that a congressman and a consul general were jointly addressing a town hall meeting on why this test should be there, and what is our justification for the test. So I realized the extraordinary value and asset these people are. Now, of course, there is a similar thing possible, and it has been done in many other places by other colleagues of mine, that it also not only is a positive factor, it can also be a very negative factor, and I'll come more on that when I deal with the security issues. In the lifting of sanctions, partial lifting, the community pressure played an extremely important role. So much so that Bill Clinton, in one of the conversations to his Secretary of State, said, "I am under so much pressure from the congressman that we have no choice, we have to do something." So this role that they played, and then came the Kargil. The other important thing was when these two things happened, we needed people, every talk show person, every television channel in US wanted somebody to appear. Now we have only that time 3 or 4 consulates and 1 embassy. We can't appear in every city, and we have many big cities. So what we did was to provide very detailed briefing to some leading community members who were very articulate, and said, all right, you can say that I will come. And at all places we ensured that some Indian community member was available to appear for these talk shows, to appear on the television panel discussion on this. And though Mr. Dovan mentioned about Pakistan having made use of their diaspora better, and undoubtedly because of the religious factor in some areas they have undoubtedly done better, but this was one occasion I would say they were completely, our performance was absolutely outstanding at that time. Now, apart from this, the community is also a great source of providing information on what is the thinking of the government of that place. Many Indian academics would be consulted by the State Department people, by the White House, and then we would have a session with them. And they would give us an indication of what is the US government's thinking. And then, as you know, in the US system, and to an extent in the other democracies also, you have the hearings of the Foreign Relations Committees. And you need people to regularly brief those people and the congressional staff. And the Indian community was immense help in ensuring that congressional staff was properly briefed, and they facilitated visits of congressmen to India and of their staff who was preparing the policy briefs for them. Now, all other countries where there are large communities can also have similar use, but the effort has not yet been the same. How the developments can impact, all of you may be familiar with this Indra movement in Malaysia. Some 25,000 people had come on the streets 2 years ago, or 2.5, 3 years now. And it became a major movement, largely by the Tamilian population. When that happened, Mr. Karunanidhi made a statement which was very sharp. It drew an even sharper response from a Malaysian minister, in the Malaysian cabinet. And here was a danger that the situation could get out of control. I'm illustrating this incident that what can happen, the Foreign Office has to constantly watch, and this situation is going to become more and more difficult in coalition politics, where the coalition partners are able to influence much more beyond what their numbers would suggest. And we all know that as far as the policy to Sri Lanka is concerned, the Tamilian question in Indo-Sri Lankan relations is one of the most important questions, and it has major implications because of this connection. So, major foreign policy implications because of this question with Sri Lanka, with Myanmar. Fortunately, the situation is under control right now, but God forbid, say if there is a problem, a major problem, then we can run into difficulty. Another potential trouble spot, again, Ambassador Bhatia was High Commissioner there, is South Africa. If you remember, some of you, a radio jockey made some racist remarks. Fortunately, the reaction in India was not very strong. It was not a very lasting one, and the government of South Africa handled the issue with great degree of maturity and wisdom, because we still enjoy very much goodwill with the African National Congress, with the ANC. But I read that if it was a place where we did not enjoy that kind of close relationship with the ruling party, what impact it can have. And it remains, I mean, it is an issue which our High Commission in that place has to watch very, very carefully. In our interactions when we came in high-level committee to South Africa, many members of the Indian community, when they were off the record, they were very candid that we remain concerned as to what is going to happen to us. And they were very honest that we are not sufficiently black to get all the facilities available to blacks, and we are not white. So we are somewhere in between. And we expect that you would equip us that we have a position. So Mauritius, of course, is more than 70% people are of Indian origin. And if the Indian Blue Water Navy needs a place outside India, the most natural choice for this very reason is Mauritius. Now, we all know in the 1991 Gulf War, our policy during that war was very substantially guided by the fact that we had a large number of people in Iraq and Kuwait who had to be evacuated, and their welfare became extremely important for a democratic society like ours. And for that reason, some of what policy we adopted also we made severe criticism for a number of countries. Now, there are other consular issues in place in Gulf which can become very serious and can acquire, if the media is not carefully handled here, they can spin out of control. A famous case, some of you may have missed it, was of this doctor, Sarita Chadha. This is an Indian doctor working in Saudi Arabia. Her husband committed suicide. Some people accused that she is responsible for it, that she has murdered, she has a hand in the death of her husband. She was put in jail. And for 10 months she remained in jail. Fortunately, her colleagues stood by her in the hospital in which she was working, and eventually, as a result of all tests done, everything, she was absolved. But it was covered in the media, but an irresponsible or excessive coverage of something like that can immediately cause major problems. The other similar incident was, and then I moved to the security implications, was a very, fortunately again the Indian media exercised great restraint, and that was in Malaysia. The only Malaysian who has climbed Mount Everest, one Murthy, he died in hospital of illness, and when he died, the person claimed that before his death he had converted to Islam. So he cannot be cremated, he must be buried. His wife said, look, I have been seeing him every day, I have been in close contact, I have never known of any desire of his to convert, and I have no reason to believe this. And the matter was litigated. For 3 weeks the funeral couldn't take place, the matter was litigated, and eventually the Malaysian court said he would be buried. And he was buried. He was not allowed to be cremated. Now, mercifully, the Indian media again, and the organizations whom people otherwise accuse of fanaticism, etc., they exercised great degree of restraint and did not play it up. But as a foreign policy professional, I was extremely worried those days that if this issue gets highlighted, it will have very, very serious problems. But that was the day when this happened. To some of my friends said that now Malaysia will have some problem with people of Indian origin. And it was not a surprise. 6 months or a year later, the Hindraf incident, the Hindraf was born, and all the problems which they have still not been able to overcome. Security implications. No separatist movement can do without, it gets major, if it has a diasporic support, it becomes a major problem. Look at the case of Khalistan movement. If there was no support outside India, Khalistan movement would have not been 50% as serious as it became. A large number of gurdwaras abroad became centers of funding. You are aware of the famous case of the Air India Kanishka crash. A visiting minister of Punjab in Vancouver, an assassination attempt was made on him in a forest road, in a very secluded area, and all over the world. And the first Indian diplomat to be killed abroad was Mahathir by the Kashmiri separatists. So the implication again, Liberation Tiger of Tamil or LTTE, they didn't stand a chance of surviving this long if they did not have Tamil diaspora to support them both financially, arms, political lobbying, in every respect. The most crucial support was of Tamil diaspora, both voluntary and coercive. They got money through both means. The constituency politics. And of course the Kashmiri separatists, and we know Ghulam Nabi Fai and Farooq Katwari and all these people, this is the Kashmiri diaspora, and the kind of hold the Mirpuri diaspora has in UK. Mr. Dover has served there, he would know. If you recall, after the Gujarat riots in 2002, first mission to send diplomats for an on-the-spot study, they said, of the human rights was the UK High Commission. And not because they are very concerned about human rights better than French or Americans or anything. Reason was, then Foreign Secretary Jack Straw had a substantial population of Indian origin in his constituency. So it's the interest that the parliamentarians, the elected representatives take because of the presence of the people of Indian origin, which can both be a positive factor as we saw in US and it can be a negative factor as we saw substantially in the case of many cases, not just this case alone. Then you have today one of the major problems on our hands is recruitment of Indian diaspora by the ISI in Gulf. Even this latest Abu Jindal has been repatriated from Saudi Arabia, and there were any number of other cases. The people are indoctrinated there, they are recruited there, they are taken from there to Pakistan for training and briefing, and then they become the silent sleeper cells in India. And places like, Kasargod, to which Mallapuram district, which Mr. Dover had referred to, or Azamgarh, which has now a very large population in Gulf. And this is another serious security challenge that we face as a result of this. And we, of course, are lifted to already mention these. I will now have to, I guess, say that the time is running out and I must wind up quickly. Economic. A country cannot be, its foreign policy cannot be effective if it's economically weak, and that's where what Mr. Dover had referred, we have a huge human resource. India is the largest recipient of the remittances, over $56 billion last year. It's a substantial part of our foreign exchange reserves. They can be a major source of investment. We have not realized their full potential, unlike the Chinese. But certainly, every time we have had distress, like the 91, then the India Development Bond, Millennium Bond, all these, the contribution by the diaspora has been substantial, and I want to say there, of course, that they don't do it only for patriotic reasons, because we offer good terms, but other things being equal. Transfer of technology and skills. If Bangalore and Hyderabad are today called the Silicon Valleys of Asia, the role of diaspora is very, very substantial. And the number of H-1B workers who have gone to US is primarily because of our diaspora at the other end. This factor, because they are in senior positions in IT companies, they have also facilitated setting up of the R&D centers of all major US IT companies in India. Personal factor comes in. This provides them an opportunity to come to India 3-4 times in the year at the cost of their company. They can give some patronage here. They can recruit people. But this has been a major factor. Apollo Hospital, the first corporatized hospital of India, was established by a member of our diaspora, Dr. Pratap Reddy, who came from Missouri to set up the first corporatized hospital. Then came Naresh Trehan with Escorts and Kundapalli Rao with the Prasada Institute, and rest is history. Today in every city, one of the biggest ironies was that this Colonel Ramboka, who organized the coup against the Indian-supported government, was 5 years ago in India for knee replacement by a doctor in Baroda. So you have this in international trade. 25 million people themselves are a very big market, and they introduce Indian products. One of the fastest growing Indian product besides IT was the Indian film and music export, and which was facilitated by the diaspora, basmati rice, tea, mangoes, and various other things which have been introduced by diaspora, providing market information. Most important thing, they provide you market information, they facilitate first contact, which are very, very useful. And then the one last question people always ask me, I mean, it's not a one-way relationship, just you get, it's only India that benefits from it, and they don't benefit from it. No, that's not the case. I've always believed it's very mutual. The diaspora benefits as much as India. If India is seen as a strong country with importance in the international arena, it raises the stock of diaspora in those countries. The best example was the Chinese people didn't care for them in Canada till the 70s. Come 80s, every Canadian, the first Chinese origin person was appointed the lieutenant governor of the British Columbia. Not because this gentleman was any less important earlier, but China had not arrived on the scene. The moment China arrived on the scene as an important country and Canada needed China and Chinese market, here was a Chinese origin person, lieutenant governor, Chinese origin person in the government, and eventually a Chinese origin person as the Governor General of Canada. And that happened across in many countries. And it is not a coincidence that all the Indian leadership abroad, they have got important position in the second half of the 90s. When India started arriving, whether it was Ujjwal Dosanjh becoming the Premier of British Columbia, or Vasudev Pandey staging a comeback in Trinidad and Tobago, or Bharat Chakdev getting his position in Guyana. So any number of these people, and even to an extent the Nobel Prize has political factor, and both Nobel Prizes to India came, to the Indian origin people came in the late 90s, both Vidyasagar Naipaul and Amartya Sen, I think in 99, and Vidyasagar Naipaul in 2000. So it is a mutually beneficial relationship, and they have their presence wherever they are has major implications for India's foreign policy, and similarly, they can be a major asset, particularly as the Prime Minister Vajpayee said in his inaugural address in the first Pravasi Divas, we are not interested so much in your riches, but riches of your experience. If India has to develop and become a knowledge path, then diaspora is a huge resource, and two sectors which require maximum reform in India and maximum support they can do with are education and healthcare. And we have about 8,000 to 10,000 academics of Indian origin in higher education abroad. And today's technology, they don't have to physically come here. They can take classes sitting there. There is already a concept, a paper on I'm working on the virtual diaspora university. So those kind of things, an Indian School of Business, Hyderabad, is a very fine example of what the diaspora's contribution can be in the field of higher education. And if you go to Gujarat, a large number of institutions have been set up by the diaspora, particularly in the field of pharmacology, pharmacy studies. So I have not had enough time to cover other things, but leave some time for question and answers, and we'll be more than happy to answer any questions. If something is left out, it can be covered in that. Thank you.